Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Well, what a difference a few months make in politics. Canada has a new-ish prime minister with the election of Mark Carney in yet another minority Liberal government. The closest competitor, the Conservative Party, lost after the evaporation of its massive 26-point lead in the polls, notwithstanding gaining its highest popular vote in decades, even while its leader, Pierre Poilievre, lost his seat, as did the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. All of this in the shadow of Donald Trump and the existential threat of his tariffs on the Canadian economy, not to mention the continuing threat of annexation as the 51st state. But what now? And more importantly, for Canada's nonprofit sector, what will the outcome of the election mean? What are the anticipated policy shifts, funding implications, and what should nonprofit leaders be watching for in the months ahead? To help us navigate these important issues, we're joined by Christopher Holz, Principal of Campbell Strategies and Government Relations Advisor for capitalW. Chris is a seasoned public affairs executive with over 20 years of experience providing counsel at all three levels of government. He's also served private sector clients, citizen groups, and charities after serving as a senior advisor to several Ontario cabinet ministers, providing his perspective on both sides of government relations. Welcome back to the podcast, Chris.
It's my pleasure to be back, Mary. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Well, let's just take a pause and reflect on the fact that it was only a couple of months ago that we were talking that we were expecting a Conservative majority. But wow, what a turn of affairs. What did you make of what happened? I'm really interested in your perspective.
Yeah, it's incredible. It is an absolutely remarkable transformational outcome. Judging from where this discussion started, maybe 6 months ago, it is incredible. Like in politics, something like this dramatic doesn't really happen that often. It is a remarkable achievement. In the case of Mr. Carney, who has not had a break since January. And while the Conservatives, it's true, were not successful, and yes, Pierre Poilievre lost his seat. The fact that the Conservatives did as well as they did is also a pretty impressive achievement. That's not a political statement. That is a reality. For over 40%, which normally would be super majority territory for any party. The fact that two of them got over 40% is remarkable. We've moved, at least for now, into a two-party type system with the destruction, candidly, of the NDP vote and certainly the Bloc vote as well. So.
Yeah, it was certainly remarkable. And in a sense, the Canadian electorate kind of met in the center in a way. At least that's seemingly what the outcome would be.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think Canadians were seized with what is an existential crisis. I think that is absolutely the language. We've all experienced it in this country. It just so happens that the antidote to that anxiety for a lot of Canadians was Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre, and as really is the only antidote to that challenge. And I think that's pretty remarkable. That's a resume that actually, wins an election. And, it's the persona and the person and his experience. That's, I think, what clearly a majority of Canadians decided for this election.
Well, now turning to the topic at hand for our audience, let's start broadly. What does a federal Liberal win in the next election signal for Canadian nonprofit and charitable sector? What does it mean we know that we're still under very difficult economic circumstances, that there are going to be priorities that may trump a lot of attention to be given to the charitable sector. What are your thoughts around this?
So Trump is a good word to trumpet, but yeah, I would say a couple things. I think it's important before we answer that question is to look, yes, at the big picture. there are lots of issues that are seized the agenda. And candidly, when we first spoke, those are some of the same issues. So the U.S. Trump tariff situation is the number one issue for the national government, all the provincial premiers, for the Canadian economy, for all of us as a population. It's the number one issue. It's the number two issue. It's the number five issue. And that we all agree on that. There's no wisdom coming from Chris Holz that says that's, that should be news to anybody. It is the number one issue. Um, the response to the Trump stuff, including whenever the site visit is, the Canadian economy, all that is linked. But there are other things that also are seen. So to answer your question, if that's number one, what are some of the other things that are on the agenda? And then we can answer, well, what does that mean for the charitable and nonprofit sector? So Trump and the Canadian economy and the response to the situation is absolutely number one. Some of that is around things like one project, one approval, the notion of building significant infrastructure in Canada. It's not just rhetoric. There is a lot of very, very serious interest in doing things, but also a national unity need to do things. And so we will see a lot of that, or at least a lot of rhetoric around it. I think there'll be some substance too. With respect to housing, it is a significant issue, as we all know, in every part of this country. And so there is quite an ambitious effort to do that. Whatever the previous Liberal government has done and other provinces have done, there is a doubling down on that, because candidly, there is a generational thing that also happened in this election, and that will need to be addressed. So those are some of the bigger issues, and there are others, but those are the ones that seem to be to capture the attention of Canadians and will be top of mind for this government. To answer the second part of your question, the core of your question, there are opportunities for the charitable and nonprofit sector, but we have to recognize, first of all, this is what's capturing the attention. I think the second thing that comes out of it is, and we said this actually before when we spoke earlier, that we will need to get more out of the dollars that governments invest in, and that means that there is going to be a review of the kinds of grants and contributions that governments provide to the charitable and nonprofit sector. That we need to get more out of what we do and how we do it. That is absolutely still to come. And it didn't matter if it was a Pierre Poilievre government or a Mark Carney government. That is an absolute reality. There are opportunities for the charitable and nonprofit sector, of course. So let's be now specific. Housing, affordable housing, homelessness, clearly an issue. There is a lot that will be coming from that. And I think that's something that the charitable nonprofit sector will want to engage. Candidly, our U.S. relationship, there's border traffic that is happening. And when we spoke 6 months ago, it was easy to see. We know that folks are going to be coming over the border. And you know what? It is happening. But support for new immigrants to Canada, refugees and others, there will be more funding for that because there will be a need for that. And we can already see that in our border communities, Windsor, in Quebec, and all across. We talked about affordable housing, but also just building new housing. There's lots of nonprofits that are operating in this space. This will not be solely private sector. There will be funding available, I'm sure, for charities and nonprofits. It's important that charities and nonprofits engage to be able to be sure that they can capture some of that funding and build the housing, the supportive housing that is needed right across the country and in the north. It's not like it's a downtown Toronto issue. It's a national issue, up and down, left and right, east and west. So those are just some areas. I would say another one, candidly, is upskilling. So we can clearly see in the last 30 days, 45 days, with some of the impacts in the auto sector, there's going to be a need for upskilling, reskilling for new kinds of employment because of what's happening and hopefully is temporary. So there's lots of charities and nonprofits that operate in that space. And I think that's certainly an opportunity for funding because it will be needed to deliver that kind of service to address a unique market space where we need to fill it with skilled employees.
And I guess, one of the other issues we heard quite a bit about was the cost of living. And that was essentially the impacts of inflation on an everyday people. And I think it also, I guess, lifted a veil and made it much more prevalent to be able to notice the challenges for folks that, were operating just above the poverty line, or perhaps didn't even, or were unemployed. And, it was, in fact, something, the cost of living was, in fact, something that was prosecuted as an issue by the conservatives for, for years leading up to this election. And certainly it did take on a great deal of attention as well during the election. How do you think, I guess, the public's perspective and its attention on these issues, how that might impact perhaps funding, or at least support, or at least an understanding and greater sort of work that might be available, um, resources for nonprofits who work in this space to support those who are suffering with this?
Yeah. First off, it's absolutely an issue. That's for sure. And the Conservatives did an excellent job of building the case around affordability, more so than the NTP did. And that's not I mean, that's just, I'm not trying to be political about it, but they did. Perhaps better than Liberals were able to, candidly. And so it is something that the Liberal Party and the Conservatives committed to with respect to specific tax reductions, which is significant. So first off, that's one area where they're looking to address it. The Liberals also removed the carbon tax that we all would pay, and we would benefit from rebates. Some of us, that's all eliminated, but the tax is also gone. But with respect to affordability, so I would say this: the Liberal policy platform is pretty specific on a whole variety of things. So even if we talk about things like food security, or food in schools and supporting children, and not just in schools, out in the summertime, kids that kids also need food support, like in especially in particular communities where that's missing. So simply to be specific, there are policy things that the Liberals have committed to in that space. There will be some more that I think charities and nonprofits might want to build the case for a particular investment in X or Y to deal with a particular challenge in a series of communities. But the biggest thing, candidly, is from a pocketbook perspective, the tax policy stuff that the Carney Liberals have announced. That is their core element. There's still funding available, or would be available, but that's the thrust of it. Those tax cuts are intended to put more money in people's pockets, to make things a bit more affordable. I would also just say, just stepping back, here's the reality. The economic situation that exists with the United States and Canada, there's inflationary pressure down there, and we will have some of it up here. And so that cost of living it was stabilizing. It certainly had been coming down in inflation. That, I'm not predicting the immediate future, but some of that may be at risk. And there's some things that governments can do, but it's not like you can control everything. Although there'll certainly be an effort.
I'm curious what you think of how might Mark Carney's background in economics and international finance shape his approach to. Certainly, we know that, I guess, the Canadian public has decided that it's appropriate. He's the man for the time, the man for the economic crisis that we're facing in the shadow of Trump's tariffs, etc. But how might that impact his approach to social policy and funding for the nonprofit sector? Have you thought about that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people might make the assumption, banker, central banker, Canada, United Kingdom, and therefore business is the answer to everything. That would be completely wrong. That would not be a good read on Prime Minister Carney. Meaning, the Prime Minister has been pretty explicit with respect to, look, there's no question that there's a role for business and industry and private sector investment. But that is not the antidote to every situation or every challenge. there's a role for government, and there's absolutely a role for the charitable and nonprofit space. I'll give you an example, and this is true. So our colleagues at capitalW say this all the time, that the charitable and nonprofit sector is Canada's largest private-public partnership by a significant margin. It's billions of dollars. So there's absolutely a recognition from the Carney Liberals that there's a role for charities and nonprofits, absolutely. And that there's a role for that in government service delivery, in solving challenges that, candidly, that business can't always do and government cannot always do. There's a role for all of us in this.
And so what specific policy areas should nonprofits keep an eye on where a Liberal government might expand funding or partnerships? What do you see on the horizon, and what kind of advice would you give?
So I think affordable housing, supportive housing is one area right off the bat. Second would be around supports for new immigrants and refugees, especially in border communities. I think that will be an issue. I mean, we can all foresee it. It is happening, and I think there'll be more of that. Upskilling. So to the extent that organizations are in the skills training for whether it's tech stuff, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whatever it may be, there will absolutely be a role for that. And that some of that is more formalized, whether we're talking about colleges and technical sort of groups. Some of them are nonprofits, candidly, that are charities that also provide upskilling type services. Those are just a few areas. There will be more through grants and contributions. But what I would say right across the board, to be completely candid, is the way that we've always done things is not the way we will be doing things tomorrow and in the future. And what I mean more specifically is, we will, as a charity and nonprofit community, we will need to do things bigger, bolder, more effectively, more cost effectively, because the moment requires it, and the funding is not unlimited. This is just the reality of the time that we're in. We've all gone through this before. When governments change, there's always this kind of thing. But when the economy changes and when there's a threat like what exists, we need to be mindful of the time. So those that can pivot, those that can partner, those that can leverage funding sources from multiple entities, whether corporate or other governments, provincial or municipal. There's lots of things that will happen. There's lots of change that will happen. Change is a good thing, but it's going to be a very dynamic time. No question about it.
You're actually echoing somebody that I interviewed for a different episode, but talked about, the need for bold action in the nonprofit sector, especially around advocacy, for attention to these issues, and said, in fact, that the mood in Ottawa, especially among the younger people who are forming the bureaucracy in our, important senior aides now, are actually quite prepared to shake up the status quo and look at new innovative ways. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I listen every day. Look, every day this week has been, I won't say worse than the day before, has been busier than the day before because of the amount of stuff that seems to be happening and the amount of change that's happening. Like I can tell you, it's been back to back today. And what I mean by that, to answer your question directly, is things that would have taken weeks or whatever. It's like, we can make a decision today. So things are happening. Things are bolder. We will take risks. We will do things that normally we would take a long time to. We're very Canadian. Let's think about it for a long time before we say yes to something. The decision making is much, much more quick. And I think that as a government, for the things that are not particularly political, which really require a level of analysis, for a lot of other things, it's going to be pretty quick. And I think that we can expect that. As an example, the Parliament's coming back. House of Commons will be back on, I think, May the 27th. Speech from the throne. There'll be a budget very shortly thereafter, which will help to implement much of the platform. Platforms also, by the way, they don't all happen on day one or in the first budget. They roll out over the mandate, whatever the length of a mandate of this minority government will be.
And I'm curious whether you think, as the mandate is rolled out, whether it's likely that this government under Mark Carney might, there are areas specifically that might actually reduce funding or partnerships. Are there some that are more vulnerable simply because they aren't hitting the most, I guess, the biggest crisis points that we're facing, that we should be aware of, and potentially be working harder at trying to find alternate solutions?
Yeah, I think that that's true. Actually, I think there are some things that are going to absolutely get the attention they deserve because they are the issues that are front and center. There are others where I don't know if there's an abandonment of entire sectors. I'm not suggesting that, but I don't think past is future. I think some sectors will need to take a harder look at what we do, how we do it, the impact we deliver. We think we deliver great impact, but if there's not an army of people saying that we do, it doesn't matter then. Sorry, but it won't. So there are some sectors where I think that may have. I can't be specific, but there's others that candidly there probably is more opportunity, and that's not dissimilar from what we said 6 months ago or whenever we last met. Time flies. But what I would say is, yeah, there will be some changes, and there will be more opportunity for some things like the groups that we've talked about, like the sectors we've talked about. But for others, it will be probably less of a priority, and that means that yeah, there will probably be less funding in those areas. Yeah.
Do you see, or have you heard any scuttlebutt or talk in the sector about changes to Canada's charitable donation tax credits or other giving incentives that could affect philanthropy under a future, the present Liberal mandate or in the years to come?
So I have heard about that. I haven't delved into it fairly deeply, but what I'd also say is, like, look, this is a government that seeks action. And every government says that. Some of them actually do it. Some of them don't. So what I mean by that is, I think this government will be focused on action, and action, candidly, that it can deliver and can control. So announceables are one thing. Action is another thing. I mean, like housing. I'm going to give you an example with housing. Even if we do all the things we want to do, it's not like there's a lot more housing built in the year because of the policies actions that a government will take. So to answer your question, I'm giving you a long answer, so you can cut this and then focus on the answer. So what I was going to simply say is, I think the platform that the party has issued is a fair amount of what they're going to do. There's always an opportunity if folks can build the case for tax reform measures that either encourage more investment in the charitable nonprofit sector, hint, hint, or otherwise. To build the case for that, that's part of a budget process. And a budget process is a year. The budget that's coming out ain't going to happen there unless it's already baked in it. It's like 12 months from now. That's the cycle begins the day after this budget comes out. So I have heard that about the notion of changes to yeah. Pardon me.
Right. But now that the election is over, for I guess the next budget, what should nonprofit leaders be doing to engage with policymakers and how to advocate for sector priorities? You talked about action-oriented kind of projects or at least initiatives. And I guess you also talked about boldness. Can you give examples of that? What exactly are you talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So let me give an example. So let's look at the platform for the Liberals. Let's say housing. I'm just going to give you an example. Like, I'm making this up. The government has a bold vision to build a significant amount of housing, and housing of every type. families, supportive housing, affordable housing, addressing homelessness. So, a bold action might be things like a group of nonprofits and charities coming together to work with prefab home builders to build, a number of housing unit developments in 7 communities across Canada. I'm just making this up. And they're seeking a specific investment to help unlock that. That's the ask. And they're doing something with 3 different prefab manufacturers. I'm just giving you an example. And by the way, they're also partnering with some social service agencies that will provide the supportive housing or the support services, the surrounding services for folks that have mental health issues or folks that are low skilled or other issues that, require that circle of support so that those folks can stay housed and actually maybe even work and have the supports that they need. So my simple point is that's an example where big and bold can happen. It's consistent with the platform, and it's an opportunity for charities and nonprofits to build a case for a specific investment out of the large funding envelope that the government is proposing. That's one. There's lots of others. But the biggest indicator, I think, is identifying things that are within the platform that the government was elected. The other way to do it, candidly, is to build an issue that captures the attention of the public and or decision makers around a particular ask. That's the other way to do it. I do both. And it can be effective, but you have to put in the time, and it's 12 months of time. It's starting from zero, absolute zero, to where you're seeking to go. So, and that's in the case of a budget, just to be clear.
Now, we were talking earlier before the election actually began, but when it was in the offing, that there was a time at which you advised nonprofit leaders to be building those relationships, or I guess cultivating them a bit more with bureaucrats, people that are in the government, government workers in the particular ministries that they were involved with, that could help once the new government was in place to actually sort of open the file and introduce them to potentially, a new MP. Supposing that they've done that, what are the next steps after that, now that we do have a new government?
Yeah. So, in advance of an election, I'm going to answer your question by starting with the before and the after. So, in advance of an election, engaging with public servants early on, so that some of the materials that go into briefing materials for whoever is successful in a government is captured. Certainly, dealing and engaging with ministers' offices or opposition critics around platform commitments, all those things help. Post-election, part of it is engaging again with public servants. So these are the civil servants, the folks that are part of the professional public service. Is one way and is a typical path to go. Part of it also is waiting candidly until the throne speech is out, a cabinet is officially announced, mandate letters, which some levels of government issue and are public and others don't. And identifying, of course, the political staff in those that support those ministers, let alone the MPs or MLAs or MPPs, depending on what government we're talking about. So what do? Speech on the throne, it's high level, but it is useful. The platform is the most important, candidly. So speech on the throne, second. Mandate letters, super specific and very, very helpful. Engaging ministers' offices, specifically the political staff that support those offices, and usually in parallel but separate, the public servants that are relevant to your issue or to the mandate item that you want to speak to, or turning a platform commitment into something specific that you're proposing. That's essentially the order of operations. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. That was really helpful. And the before and after, I think, is really, again, focusing one's attention to the appropriate things to do at the appropriate time is really helpful for those that aren't skilled or experienced in this area. I'm curious, and I've spoken to other folks in the sector about this, whether in the space of advocacy or um, for the sector, but specifically potentially for programs or other initiatives. We saw this enormous galvanization of the Canadian citizens around unity and their sense of being Canadian, and that also emphasized and was really about, in essence, our values and how they were quite distinct from the American values, and are uniquely our own. And I'm curious whether you think that potentially that same sort of energy is happening in the nonprofit sector, where they can be galvanized by that same sort of sense of what our values are, what's necessary in our community, what value they bring to the Canadian society, and whether that's an energy that could be, I guess, harnessed.
Unleashed.
Yes.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts around that?
I think that's great. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think channeling that energy would is the rocket fuel that the charitable nonprofit sector needs, and has, and some use it. And there's examples all over the place where some are using that. But I think that that's a great idea. I would just say, not every, enthusiasm is and a sense of pride, I think, is important, and to the extent that it can be channeled, it's even better. um, but to the extent that it can be channeled and is linked to the commitments of the government, or new issues that have emerged that have captured the attention of the public, that's where, like, there's some things that we could be calling for that there's no interest by anybody in government to do this. So all simply to say, yes, I think that would be it's a great opportunity and something that can help stand the charitable nonprofit sector stand out, particularly on some core issues, and can galvanize the attention of the public that we serve, our donors, the donor communities that we serve, and certainly engage decision makers. How that plays out, I think, is the magic. I think is the skill that many charitable nonprofit leaders have. So to the extent that it's done skillfully, very effective.
Well, finally, just to wrap things up, what is one practical piece of advice that you'd give to nonprofit leaders today to ensure that they're ready for the post-election policy environment? Uh,
Yeah.
I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
So I think the biggest thing is look at the platform. Starting the liberal platform, I think being mindful of what the others said, and they're all online still, but I don't know when this will air, so you never know. So look to the liberal platform. Look to the speech from the throne, the mandate letters when they come out, who the cabinet ministers are, and their political staff. And I say all of that because whatever we are and what we want, it's always about figuring out how we fit within the frame of decision makers. But let's also look at the bigger picture, some of the bigger issues that are consuming any government. We have to be mindful that, just because we really care about this program doesn't mean that anybody's paying any attention to it over there, because the United States is causing absolute havoc with respect to not just us. We are not alone. It's all over the place. So I would say look to all those things, determine how we fit, and then figure out what the best approach is. The best approach might be, let's leverage our local relationships before we engage a minister's office, because we so happen to know our local MP who was just elected. Yay for us. We might know zero people. That's fine, because you know what? It's great to start at the bottom by meeting your new MP, and demonstrating the value that you bring to your community, to the folks that you serve. And that person, with a couple of engagements, maybe becomes a champion for you, so that when you go to Minister so-and-so, this MP or MLA or MPP or whomever it may be is supportive of the organization. So, we start where we are, and we work up and build the case and leverage the support of others to capture the attention of decision makers to say yes to something that we're calling for.
Well, as always, Chris, it's such a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your insights into the political landscape and how nonprofit and charities can navigate these turbulent times of the new political environment we find ourselves. I guess we should buckle up for a bumpy ride, but at least we now know where we stand, and certainly your advice on where we can go forward will be very helpful to the nonprofit leaders that listen to our podcast. Thank you for joining Charity Village Connects.
It was my pleasure, Marion. It's great to see you again.